I ran a survey where over 2,000 Sonic fans voted on which games they believed were mainline Sonic games. You might be asking, what is a mainline Sonic game? I don't know. That's why I've been doing this 3-part series where I try to figure that out. The survey had over 90 games, and for each game, people voted whether the game was a mainline game, a side game, a spin-off game, not a Sonic game, or that they simply didn't know what the game was. Let's start from the bottom with the games that practically no one voted to be mainline and work our way up to the games that were nearly universally considered mainline. At the very bottom, we have Wacky World's Creativity Studio. Only 12 people out of the 2,025 people that took the survey voted that this game was mainline. That's less than 1% of voters. I don't even know if you can call this a Sonic game. Sonic does show up in the game and he is on the box art, but he might as well just be a cameo. This game is sort of a Mario Paint style game released in 1994 on the Genesis, where you make art. The majority of people, 54% of everyone who took the survey, voted that this game was in fact not a Sonic game. No surprise there. Next we have Sonic Eraser, a puzzle game released on the Genesis. 18 people, or 0.88% of the vote, said that this game was mainline. From what I'm aware, Sonic only shows up in the Versus mode, so yeah, it makes sense this game ranks so low. 65% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is Sonic Athletics, an arcade game where you run on a treadmill. Only 20 people, or 0.98% of voters, said that this game was mainline. About 56% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. We finally have our first game above 1%, Sonic Jump Fever. 22 votes, or 1.08% of voters, said that this game was mainline. This game is a sequel to Sonic Jump, a 2012 mobile game. Roughly 71% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Tied with Sonic Jump Fever, we have Sonic at the Olympics. No, not Mario and Sonic at the Olympics, just Sonic at the Olympics, a mobile game released in 2008. Roughly 71% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next we have Sonic Prime Dash, one of the many Endless Runner games, but this one is based on the Sonic Prime Netflix series. 23 people, which equals 1.13% of voters, said that this game was a mainline game. 70% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Tied with Sonic Prime Dash, we have Sonic Dash 2 Sonic Boom, another Endless Runner game, but this one is based on the Sonic Boom TV series. 73% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have Sonic the Hedgehog's Gameworld, a minigame collection released on Sega's edutainment console, the Sega Pico. 24 people, or 1.18% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 55% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Tied with Gameworld, we have Sonic Jump 2, another Sonic Jump game and a pretty old one at that. About 70% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games. I accidentally put on the survey that this game came out in 2008. That's my bad. The game came out in 2010. 27 people, or 1.33% of voters, said that this game was mainline. About 75% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is SegaSonic Cosmo Fighter, an arcade Sonic shoot-'em-up. 28 people, or 1.38% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 61% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Tied with the last game, we have Sonic Drift, a Sonic racing game that was originally only released in Japan. Nearly 82% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have Sonic at the Olympic Games. I know, we already looked at Sonic at the Olympic Games, but this is the Tokyo 2020 version. 29 people, or 1.43% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 75% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up, we have a 4-way tie between Speed Sphere Challenge, Sonic X, Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car, and Sonic Jump. 30 people, or 1.48% of voters, chose these games to be mainline. Speed Sphere Challenge is a browser game made to tie in with the Sonic Lego set. There was no real consensus on what this game was amongst the people who took the survey, but the largest group was 36% of voters who claimed that this game was a spin-off. The next biggest group was roughly 34% of voters who said that they didn't know what the game was. Sonic X on the Leapster is an educational tie-in game with the Sonic X anime. 56% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car is a game where Sonic is a cop. About 66% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. So for Sonic Jump, I actually made a mistake. I didn't specify whether this was the original Sonic Jump or the 2012 remake, so my bad there. I'm guessing most of you were probably thinking that this was the 2012 game though, and not the super old 2005 mobile game. That means the original Sonic Jump didn't get a separate entry on the list. Again, my bad for the mix-up. Next, we have Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Olympic Winter Games, which I think is the longest title for a Sonic game. This is, of course, one of the many Mario and Sonic minigame collections where you compete in Olympic events. 31 people, or 1.53% of voters, said that this game was a mainline game. 70% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Tied with the last game, we have Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. And just like the last game, about 70% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. This tie is actually a three-way tie along with Sonic Drift 2, a sequel to the first Sonic Drift and the first Drift game released outside of Japan. 80% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is SegaSonic Popcorn Shop, a popcorn dispenser with a Sonic minigame attached to it. 32 people, or 1.58% of voters, said that this game was mainline. About 58% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Tied with the last game, we have another Olympic minigame collection, Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games. 71% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. This tie is another three-way tie along with Sonic Pinball Party, an often forgotten pinball game on the GBA with a really good soundtrack. 80% of people said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is Sega Streaming Theater Sonic Edition. This is a Sonic platformer with live stream integration. Viewers could post comments that would actually show up in the game. 33 people, or about 1.63% of voters, said that this game was mainline. There was no consensus as to what this game was, but the number one answer was, I don't know, which 32% of voters chose. Tied with the last game, we have Tails and the Music Maker, another Sega Pico minigame collection, but this time starring Tails. About 66% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have another three-way tie between Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020, Sonic Dash, and Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. 35 people, or about 1.73% of voters, said that these games were mainline. 71.5% of voters said that Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020 was a spin-off. If you're annoyed at all of these Sonic Endless Runners, blame Sonic Dash. 72% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing is the first game in what I guess you could call the Sonic Racing series, a series which is getting a new game in the future with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. I'm hoping it's another game like this one where you have a bunch of different characters instead of just Sonic characters. But anyways, about 75.8% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have a tie between Sonic Forces Speed Battle and Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games. 36 people, or 1.77% of voters, said that these games were mainline. Sonic Forces Speed Battle is a mobile racing game made to tie in with Sonic Forces. 67.7% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games is another Olympic Games minigame collection. 71.3% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have another Olympic minigame collection, the original Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. And fortunately, this is the last one on the list. 37 people, or 1.82% of people, said that this game was mainline. 71.2% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up, we have a tie between Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, both with 39 votes, which is about 1.92% of voters. I guess Sega realized that most people didn't care about the Sega franchises, so they removed their own name from the title in the sequel. 77.1% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is a clone of Puyo Puyo. 78.9% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is Sonic Speed Simulator, an official Roblox Sonic game. 48 people, or 2.37% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 53.2% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next is Sonic Runner's Adventure, a 2D perspective endless runner game released on mobile devices. 50 people, or 2.46% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 64.1% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is Sonic Spinball, another Sonic pinball video game. I didn't include the 8-bit version of Sonic Spinball, so that's my bad, but I don't think including it would have made much of a difference on this list. Anyways, 57 people, or 2.81% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 71% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is the educational horror game, Sonic Schoolhouse. 71 people, or 3.5% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 65% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is the original Sonic Runners, a discontinued mobile game that was actually made by Sonic Team. 73 people, or 3.6% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 62% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have Sonic Labyrinth, aka the slow Sonic game. 80 people, or 3.95% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 52.5% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is Sonic Jam. No, not the compilation game, because I didn't include compilations on this list, but Sonic Jam on the Gamecom, a really ugly looking platformer. 83 people, or 4.09% of voters, said that this game was mainline. The number one answer was that this game was a spin-off, which 30.9% of people voted for. Up next, we have the party game Sonic Shuffle on the Dreamcast. I'm a little surprised they never really tried another console party game, though there was a party mode in Sonic and the Secret Rings. 87 people, or 4.29% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 77.5% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Continuing on, we have another Tails game, Tails' Skypatrol. Don't forget the apostrophe there. 92 people, or 4.54% of voters, said that this game was mainline. It's crazy how this game managed to beat all of the Sonic Endless Runners. 64.7% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. With that out of the way, we now move on into the triple digits zone, with 121 votes saying that this game was mainline, or 5.97% of voters. We have the Sonic the Hedgehog Movie 3 game. Paramount actually released a Genesis game based on the new Sonic 3 movie. It's more of a novelty than anything, but it is a game. The number one answer was that this game was a spin-off, which 36.6% of voters chose. With 124 votes saying that this game was mainline, or 6.12% of voters, we have Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood, the Sonic RPG that everyone tries to pretend never existed. 57.5% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up is Sonic Boom: Shattered Crystal, another game in the short-lived Sonic Boom experiment. 129 people, or 6.37% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 56.8% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Continuing on, we have another Sonic Boom game, Sonic Boom Fire and Ice, which somehow managed to beat Shattered Crystal, which was the first Sonic Boom 3DS game. Fire and Ice had 132 voters who said that the game was mainline, which represents 6.51% of the votes. 57.3% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Up next is another Tails game, Tails Adventure. No apostrophe this time. 136 people, or 6.71% of voters, said that this game was mainline. 58.6% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. With 145 votes, which is 7.61% of voters, we have Sonic the Fighters, the very first 3D Sonic game. 68.2% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next up, we have Sonic N, with 146 votes, or 7.2% of everyone who voted. Including this game was a mistake on my part, since Sonic N is basically just a Sonic Advance port on the N-Gage. I don't think it's quite different enough from Sonic Advance to be given a separate entry on the list. I wanted to avoid ports and re-releases for the most part. But anyways, the number one answer for what this game was ended up being I don't know, which 37.3% of voters picked. We are now officially halfway done with the list. Moving on, we have Team Sonic Racing. This game got 176 mainline votes, or 8.69% of voters. 67.8% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Next, we have Sonic Blast. Not Sonic 3D Blast, just Sonic Blast, released on the Game Gear. This game had 196 mainline votes, which was 9.67% of voters. 61.2% of voters said that this game was a side game. Yes, we finally escaped the spin-off purgatory. Continuing on, we have Sonic Pocket Adventure, which got 200 mainline votes, which was 9.87% of voters. 64.5% of voters said that this game was a side game. Up next, we have good old Sonic R, which got 206 mainline votes, or 10.1% of voters, making this our first game with a double-digit percentage of voters. That means from now on, at least 1 out of every 10 of you were crazy enough, cultured enough to pick one of these games as mainline. Next, we have Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric with 222 mainline votes, or 10.9% of voters. With that, we are done with the Sonic Boom series. 56.1% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Moving on, we have Sonic Free Riders, the lowest ranking Riders game on this list. Not too surprising this one ranked the lowest, as it seemed to be the one that the least amount of people played due to it being an exclusive to the Xbox 360, plus you needed the Kinect peripheral to play it. The game had 242 mainline votes, or 11.9% of voters. 59.2% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. Up next, we have The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, easily one of the most unique Sonic games, being a detective visual novel. This game got 263 mainline votes, or 12.9% of voters. The number one response was that this game was a spin-off, which 47% of voters chose, although a sizable 36.7% of voters said that this game was a side game. Next, we have SegaSonic the Hedgehog, the Sonic arcade classic. This game had 284 mainline votes, which is 14% of voters. The number one response was that this game was a side game, which 41% of voters chose, although 35.1% of voters said that this game was a spin-off. The next game is everyone's beloved Sonic Rivals. The game got 288 mainline votes, which is 14.2% of voters. The number one response was that this game was a side game, which 48% of voters chose. The next most common response was that this game was a spin-off, which 33.1% of voters picked. Our next title is the 8-bit version of Sonic 1, which got 301 mainline votes, which is 14.8% of the voters. This game got a very high 71.7% of voters who said that this game was a side game. Moving right along here, we have Sonic Rivals 2, which strangely got 302 votes, which is 14 more mainline votes than the original Sonic Rivals. 302 mainline votes represents 14.9% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 48.6% of voters chose. The next most common response was that this game was a spin-off, which 31.8% of voters picked. Next up is Sonic Riders Zero Gravity, our next Sonic Riders game, which got 303 mainline votes, which is about 14.96% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a spin-off, which 55.6% of voters chose. Fittingly, our next game is the original Sonic Riders, which got 327 mainline votes, representing 16.1% of voters. Like with Zero Gravity, the most common response was that this game was a spin-off, which 55.4% of voters chose. Only a few votes above the last entry, we have another 8-bit game, the 8-bit version of Sonic 2, which got 330 mainline votes, which is 16.2% of voters. Like with 8-bit Sonic 1, the most common response was that this game was a side game, which 71.3% of voters picked. We've got a big jump in votes with the next game, Sonic Chaos, which got 391 mainline votes, which is 19.3% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 61.7% of voters chose. Next up, we have the most chaotic Sonic game ever, Knuckles Chaotix. Yeah, it got 470 mainline votes, which is 23.2% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 48.3% of voters chose. Next up, we have another game that was released during Sonic's awkward phase in the mid-90s, that game being Sonic Triple Trouble, the debut of the greatest Sonic character ever, Fang the Sniper. This game got 472 mainline votes, which is 23.3% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 62.6% of voters picked. Coming up next, we have another Sonic fighting game, Sonic Battle, which got 477 mainline votes, which is 23.5% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a spin-off, which 40.9% of voters chose. Though, not too far behind it, the second most common response was that this game was a side game, which 32.7% of voters chose. Next is the 3DS version of Sonic Generations, which got 550 mainline votes, which is 27.1% of voters. I felt like this version of the game was unique enough from its console/PC counterpart to include as a separate entry. The most common response was that Sonic Generations 3DS was a side game, which 63.9% of voters chose. Moving right along, we have Sonic Dream Team, the Apple Arcade exclusive. Despite being an Apple exclusive, it got a respectable 633 mainline votes, which is 31.2% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which an even 52% of voters chose. Next up is Sonic Rush 3, the DS version of Sonic Colors, which got 661 mainline votes, which is 32.6% of of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 60.2% of voters chose. Up next, we have Sonic 4 Episode 1. I'm not surprised the game ranked this low, but then again, it did get 700 mainline votes, which is 34.56% of voters, meaning at least 1 out of every 3 people who voted thought that this game was mainline. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 48.9% of voters chose. As if it were fate, our next game is Sonic 4 Episode 2, which got 722 mainline votes, which is 35.6% of voters. It's interesting that Episode 2 ranked higher than Episode 1. It's weird that several of these sequel games in the various Sonic sub-series like Sonic Rivals, the Sonic and Tails series, and the Sonic 4 series actually ranked higher than the first games. It could be because the sequel games often had more involved and impactful stories to the franchise, like Sonic Triple Trouble introduced Fang, and Sonic 4 Episode 2 brought back Metal Sonic. The most common response was that Sonic 4 Episode 2 was a side game, which 48.5% of voters chose. Coming up next, we have the MVP of the previous video in this series, Sonic 3D Blast, which got 743 votes, which is 36.6% of voters. The most common response was that this game was a side game, which 50.4% of voters chose. With a jump of over 100 votes from the last entry, we have Sonic and the Secret Rings, which got 850 mainline votes, which is 41.9% of voters. Whether this game was mainline or a side game was actually quite a toss-up in the vote, as 915 voters, or 45.1% of voters, said that this game was a side game. Fittingly, our next game is the second Sonic storybook game, Sonic and the Black Knight, which got 872 mainline votes, which is 43% of voters. The vote between whether this game was mainline or a side game was even closer than Secret Rings, because while 43% of voters said that Black Knight was mainline, 44.3% of voters said that it was a side game. Next up, we have the often overlooked second Rush game, Sonic Rush Adventure, which got 966 mainline votes, which is 47.7% of voters. This trend of close votes continues because 44.2% of voters said that it was a side game. Following up here, we have another Sonic handheld game, Sonic Advance, which is our first game with over 1,000 votes. This game pulled in 1,010 mainline votes, which is 49.8% of voters. In another close race, 46.2% of voters said that this game was a side game. With Sonic Advance out of the way, we officially passed the 50% threshold with this next game, Sonic Advance 3, which got 1,023 mainline votes, representing 50.5% of voters. Like the last game, the next most common response was that this game was a side game, which 44.9% of voters chose. Let's complete the trilogy with the next game, Sonic Advance 2, which got 1,027 mainline votes, only 4 more than Sonic Advance 3. And those 1,027 votes represents 50.7% of voters. The next most common response again was that this was a side game, which 45.3% of voters chose. Advance 2 is also the first game in the top 20. Our next game is Sonic Rush, which is interesting since Sonic Rush Adventure was right below all of the Advance games, while the original Rush ranked right above all 3 of the Advance games. So we've got a sort of handheld Sonic sandwich here. In any case, Sonic Rush got 1,052 mainline votes, which is 51.9% of voters. The next most common response, as you'd expect, was that this was a side game, which 41.8% of voters chose. With that out of the way, we make our way over to what I call the big boys tier. With the next game, we see a massive jump of over 300 votes. That game is Shadow the Hedgehog, which got 1,394 mainline votes, which is 68.8% of voters. At this point, there's a very clear majority of voters that said that these games were mainline. The next most common response was that this game was a side game, which 18.96% of voters chose. Funnily enough, we have another pretty sizable jump, this time of over 200 votes, with everyone's favorite disappointment, Sonic Superstars, which got 1,628 mainline votes, representing 80.3% of voters. The next most common response was that this game was a side game, which 15.3% of voters chose. The only other game in the 80% club was Sonic's return to 16-bit style fun, Sonic Mania, which got 1,787 mainline votes, or 88.2% of voters. The next most common response was that this game was a side game, which only got 198 votes, or 9.7% of voters. Now we move on to the exclusive 90% and up club. First, with 1,825 mainline votes representing 90.1% of voters, we have Sonic X Shadow Generations. I thought Shadow Generations had enough content to warrant this remaster as a separate entry from the original generation, so here we are. The next most common response was that this game was a side game, which 6.5% of voters chose. Next up is the often disrespected Sonic Lost World, which got 1,849 mainline votes, which represents 91.3% of voters. The next most common response was that this game was a side game, which 5.9% of voters chose. From this point onward, I'm not going to mention what the second most common response was, simply because the number of votes for the second highest response were so low that they really don't matter. Also, I should mention that I didn't include the 3DS version of Sonic Lost World, which I didn't include because it kind of just seemed like a scaled down version of the Wii U release, but there are significant differences like different levels, so I probably should have included it. My bad. Moving right along, we have, oh boy, Sonic 06, which got 1,929 mainline votes, representing 95.25% of voters. Next up is the Wii version of Sonic Colors, which got 1,950 mainline votes, representing 96.2% of voters. Coming up next, we have Sonic the Hedgehog CD, which got 1,960 mainline votes, representing 96.7% of voters. With that out of the way, we officially make our way into the super duper exclusive top 10. Every game from this point onward had at least 97% of voters say that the game was mainline. Next up at number 10, we have Sonic Forces, which got 1,968 mainline votes, representing 97.1% of voters. At number 9, we have the console/PC version of Sonic Generations, which got 1,983 mainline votes, representing 97.9% of voters. At number 8, we have Sonic Heroes, with 1,989 mainline votes, representing 98.2% of voters. At number 7, with only one more vote than Sonic Heroes, we have the Xbox 360/PS3 version of Sonic Unleashed. I didn't include the Wii/PS2 version of Sonic Unleashed, and just like with Sonic Lost World 3DS, I should have included it. My bad. But anyways, our next game at number 6, and the first game with over 2,000 votes, we have Sonic Frontiers. This game got 2,004 mainline votes, representing 98.9% of the voters. Now, we enter into the final 5. These games all had at least 99% of voters say that they were mainline. To be honest, at this stage, the votes were so close that the final ranking doesn't really matter much, but we're still gonna do it anyway. At number 5, with 2,008 mainline votes representing 99.1% of voters, we have Sonic 2 on the Sega Genesis. Next up, we actually have a tie between the next two entries, meaning both of these games will be ranked in third place. These games are Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Adventure 2, both with 2,009 votes, representing 99.2% of voters. Next up, at number 2, we have Sonic Adventure with 2,010 mainline votes, representing 99.25% of voters. Which means, finally, at number 1, to no one's surprise, is the original Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis, with 2,012 mainline votes, representing 99.35% of voters. Shout out to the 8 people who voted that Sonic the Hedgehog is in fact not a Sonic game. But there you have it. Those are all of the games in the survey ranked by the mainline votes that they got. Now that we've gone through the games, I wanted to take a look at some interesting data. Like I mentioned before, in the survey, you could vote that a game was mainline, a side game, a spin-off, you don't know, or that the game is not a Sonic game. Let's take a look at which games ranked the highest in the side game voting. The top 10 were Sonic 3D Blast at number 10, Sonic Dream Team at number 9, Sonic Colors DS, Sonic Blast, Sonic Chaos, Sonic Triple Trouble, Sonic Generations 3DS, Sonic Pocket Adventure, Sonic 2 8-bit, and at number 1, Sonic 1 8-bit. Some of you were curious as to what exactly a side game is, and like with the mainline games, there really is no clear-cut definition. It's whatever you think a side game is. My personal definition of a side game is any game that plays like a mainline game, but it doesn't feel like a mainline game, if that makes sense. I guess you could say it's like a Diet Coke. You get the same idea as a normal Coke, but it does taste different. I think that definition fits what a lot of people thought. If you look at the top 10 games in the side game voting, they're all platformers just like the top 10 mainline Sonic games. However, most of these games were primarily developed by another company besides Sonic Team, or they were handheld versions of other Sonic games. And I think in general, handheld games don't really get the same respect that console games do. Next, let's take a look at the games that rank the highest in the spin-off category. From number 10 to number 1, we have Sonic Dash 2 Sonic Boom, Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games, Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing, Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed, Sonic Shuffle, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, Sonic Drift 2, Sonic Pinball Party, and at number 1, the original Sonic Drift. From what I can gather, spin-offs were the holding place for all of the Olympic Games, minigames collections, racing games, and any other game with a drastically different genre than the mainline Sonic games. However, one interesting thing I noticed was that the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog had 47% of voters say that it was a spin-off. That's nearly half of everyone who voted, and it makes sense, because it's a detective visual novel, which is like the farthest thing from a platformer. However, compare the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog to Sonic Pinball Party, a pinball game which I would say is equally as distant from being a platformer, yet Pinball Party ranked far higher in the spin-off category, with 80.3% of voters saying that it was a spin-off. The murder of Sonic ranked much higher than Pinball Party in both the mainline ranking and the side game ranking. It had 12.9% of voters saying that it was mainline and 36.7% of voters saying that it's a side game. Compare that to Sonic Pinball Party, which only had a measly 1.38% of voters saying that it's mainline and 9.72% of voters saying that it's a side game. The reason for this big difference, I think, is because of the story that the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog has. Murder of Sonic has a much bigger emphasis on story and character interactions, and I think that made it feel more like a mainline game to people. But obviously, because its gameplay is so different, a lot of people couldn't justify calling it mainline, so they opted for the side game option instead. So perhaps the side game option is a sort of middle ground between being a mainline game and being a spin-off. The next category was not a Sonic game, which of course is for the games people felt weren't Sonic games. Let's look at the top 10. From number 10 to number 1, first up we have a tie between Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games and Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games. Number 8, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. Number 7 is Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Olympic Games. Number 6 is Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020. Number 5 is Mario and Sonic at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. Alright, that's the last Olympic game. Number 4 is Speed Sphere Challenge. Number 3 is SegaSonic Popcorn Shop. Number 2 is Sega Streaming Theater Sonic Edition. And at number 1, we have Wacky World's Creativity Studio. Nothing too surprising here. A lot of the games that didn't have Sonic in their names were high up on the list of not a Sonic game. Every single game on this list got at least one vote that it wasn't a Sonic game, which is of course just people trolling. The last category was I don't know. This is for the games that people weren't sure of what category they belonged to. Let's look at the top 10. At number 10 we have Wacky World's Creativity Studio. Number 9 is Sonic X on the Leapster. Number 8 is Sonic Jam on the Gamecom. Number 7 is SegaSonic Cosmo Fighter. Number 6 is Sonic's Gameworld. Number 5 is the Sonic 3 movie game. Number 4 is Sonic Athletics. Number 3 is Sega Streaming Theater Sonic Edition. Number 2 is Speed Sphere Challenge. And number 1 is Sonic N. This is another one that isn't surprising. Most of these games are pretty obscure. Like I mentioned before, I probably shouldn't have included Sonic N since it's a port of Sonic Advance. So if you don't include that, number 1 would be Speed Sphere Challenge, and number 10 would be Sonic Jump Fever. Now that we've gone through all of the categories, let's take a look at some interesting trends in the data. 838 people voted that all of the Sonic Rush games and all of the Sonic Advance games are mainline. Out of the 943 people that voted both Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure as mainline games, 88.8% of them also said that the Sonic Advance games are mainline. And inversely, out of the 996 people who voted that all of the Advance games are mainline, 84.1% of them said that all of the Rush games are mainline as well. Meaning there's a strong correlation between the people who view the Rush games as mainline and the Advance games as mainline. This makes sense as both series are handheld platformers. This got me interested, so I decided to see how many of the people who voted for both the Rush games and the Advance games as mainline also voted for the Sonic Rivals games as mainline. 28.2% of the 838 people who voted for all of the Advance games and all of the Rush games also voted for the Rivals games. However, out of the 264 people who voted that both Rivals games were mainline, 89.7% of them said that the Rush series and the Advance series were mainline. So while being a Rush and Advance mainline truther didn't mean you were a Rivals truther, chances are if you thought the Rivals games were mainline, you also thought the Advance and Rush games were mainline. Something else I looked for was I wanted to see if there was any significant crossover between people who voted for Sonic 3D Blast, Sonic Spinball, and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I did this because everyone remembers Sonic Mega Collection as this compilation of classic Sonic games, including Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and Knuckles. But 3D Blast, Spinball, and Mean Bean Machine were also included as headliner games on that collection. Out of the 743 people who voted that that Sonic 3D Blast was a mainline game, only 6% of them voted that Spinball was mainline, and only 3.36% voted that Mean Bean Machine was mainline. Out of the 57 people who voted that Sonic Spinball was mainline, 78.9% of them said that 3D Blast was also mainline, and 28% said that Mean Bean Machine was mainline. Out of the 39 people who said that Mean Bean Machine was mainline, 64.1% of people said that 3D Blast was also mainline, and 41% said that Spinball was mainline. So it seems like while 3D Blast mainline voters weren't all inclined to vote for Spinball and Mean Bean Machine, most Spinball mainline voters and most Mean Bean Machine mainline voters did believe that 3D Blast was also mainline. Another thing I decided to check is whether there was any overlap between the people who voted for Sonic Colors DS and Sonic Generations 3DS as mainline. Both are handheld versions of console games that the vast majority of people said were mainline, so I thought it'd be interesting to see. 491 people voted that Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations 3DS were both mainline, which means 74.2% of people who voted that Sonic Colors DS was mainline also voted that Sonic Generations 3DS was mainline, and a whopping 89.2% of people who voted that Sonic Generations 3DS was mainline also voted that Sonic Colors DS was mainline. So we do have a pretty strong connection between people who view both of these games as mainline. I was curious, so I also decided to add the 8-bit versions of Sonic 1 and 2 into the mix as well, as these games were released not just on the Master System but also on the Game Gear, making them handheld versions of games that the majority of people said were mainline too. 190 people voted that both Sonic Colors DS and Sonic Generations 3DS as well as Sonic 1 8-bit and Sonic 2 8-bit were all mainline. This means that 38.6% of the 491 people that voted that Sonic Colors DS and Sonic Generations 3DS also voted that Sonic 1 8-bit and Sonic 2 8-bit were mainline. And 68.3% of the 278 people who voted for both Sonic 1 8-bit and Sonic 2 8-bit as mainline also voted that Colors DS and Generations 3DS were mainline. So there is a significant connection there. Speaking of generations, let's look at the console PC generations and Sonic X Shao generations. 1,804 people voted that both Sonic Generations and Sonic X Shao generations were both mainline, which is 89% of everyone who voted in the survey. 98.8% of everyone who voted for Sonic X Shao generations as mainline also voted that Sonic Generations was mainline. And 90.9% of everyone who voted for Sonic Generations also voted for Sonic X Shao Generations as mainline. This means that just about everyone who thought that Sonic X Shao Generations was mainline also thought that the original Generations was mainline, but there were nearly 180 people who felt that only the original Generations was mainline. Interestingly, out of the 42 people who thought that the original Generations was not mainline, 21 people, which is a clean 50% of those people, thought that Sonic X Shao Generations was mainline. So there are 21 other people out there who think that neither Sonic Generations nor Sonic X Shao Generations are mainline. I was curious to see if these people were just trolling, but surprisingly, most of them seemed genuine. There was one person out of those 21 people who said that Sonic 1 was the only mainline Sonic game. There was another person that said that Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 were both mainline, but that Sonic 3 and Knuckles was a side game. So I'm not really sure what to do with that information. I also thought it'd be intriguing to see how many people thought both Generations and 3DS Generations were mainline. The answer was 544 people, which is 27.4% of everyone who voted for Generations, and 98.9% of everyone who voted for Generations 3DS. This means there were 6 people out there who thought that Generations 3DS was a mainline game, but not the console PC version of Generations. I really don't know why that is. Maybe they just grew up with that version, or maybe they felt like Sonic X Shao Generation should replace the original Generations. I was really curious, so I decided to look at what those 6 voters chose, and as you probably expected, some of them were in fact trolls. 2 out of the 6 people said that the original Sonic the Hedgehog was not a Sonic game. The other 4 people seemed to be pretty genuine in their answers, even if they were a bit strange. Like one person said that Sonic 1 and Sonic 1 8-bit were both mainline, but Sonic 2 was mainline while Sonic 2 8-bit was a side game. Let's look at how many people included all 3 Generations games. Out of the 544 people who thought that both the PC/console generations and 3DS generations were both mainline, 519 people, or 95.4% of those people, thought that Sonic X Shao Generations was also mainline. This means that 25.6% of everyone who voted, which is a little over a quarter of of the voters thought that all 3 generations games were mainline. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, there were 17 people who thought that none of the 3 generations games were mainline. I can somewhat understand this reasoning, but only just barely. Generations is an anniversary celebration, a run-through of all of Sonic's most iconic levels. So maybe those people felt that Generations was more of a fan service nostalgia bait game than a true mainline Sonic game. That's it for the trends that I wanted to talk about. At the end of the survey, I asked if there were any games I missed, and there were a few ones I wanted to note. Obviously, I already brought up Sonic Jump, Wii/PS2 Unleashed, Lost World 3DS, and Spinball 8-bit. But there were a few other Sonic games that people said I missed, like Big Chungus 2 and Knuckles, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, and TV Off by Kendrick Lamar. But seriously, a few of the games people brought up that I thought I should mention were the mobile version of Sonic Unleashed, which, yeah, I probably should have included that game. Honestly, I was just too overwhelmed to go through every single mobile game because man, are there so many. Browser games, Flash games, and LCD games were other groups of games that would take an enormous amount of time to list. Another game people mentioned was Flicky, which, sure, yeah, I guess it would be appropriate to consider it a Sonic game. Flickies are important to the Sonic series. Another game someone brought up was Rad Mobile, a 1990 racing game, which is technically the first appearance of Sonic the Hedgehog in a video game, even though Sonic himself doesn't actually appear. It's just a mirror ornament that looks like Sonic in the car. So I don't really feel too bad about not including that one. Though some people did bring up the Super Smash Bros. Games, and Sonic obviously does appear in most of those, so maybe I should have at least included it on the list since I did include the Mario and Sonic games. Sonic Extreme was another game that was mentioned, but I didn't include it because the game was never released. Another game that was mentioned was Sonic Rumble, which is another game that has not been released. I mean, I know the game is going to be coming out soon, but it's not out yet. Though, I guess there was a beta of the game that was out for a little bit, but whatever. It isn't the full game, so I didn't count Sonic Rumble. Some people brought up collections like Sonic Origins and Sonic Gems Collection, but I didn't include those because they're compilations of older games, not so much original games themselves. Though, I guess Sonic Jam on the Saturn does have its own 3D platformer mode, even if it is just a glorified hub world. Let's do a quick lightning round of some of the games people thought that I should have included in the survey. Sonic Adventure DX, Sonic Colors Ultimate, Sonic Mania Plus, Knuckles and Sonic 2, Sonic 4 Episode Medal, Sonic Racing on the Apple Arcade, Sega Superstars Tennis, the Sonic Happy Meal toys, Sonic Go Shooting, Sonic Brain Ranking, Sonic Golf 3D, Sonic Tennis, Sonic Bowling, Sonic Racing Kart, Sonic's Napoleon, Amy's American Page 1, Shadow Shoot, Tails' Flying Get, Eggman's Number Guessing Panic, Good Friend Child, Speed, Speed DX, and all the other Sonic Cafe games, Sonic Digit, the Sonic Roll board game, Dynamite Ducks, the 8-bit Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, Lego Dimensions, the Tiger Electronic Sonic games, Sega Sonic Bros, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2, Christmas Nights, and of course, the greatest Sonic game ever, Blue Sphere. I didn't include Blue Sphere because obviously everyone would have voted for that game to be mainline, and I wanted the survey to be at least a little bit fair to all the other Sonic games. For a lot of these games, I mean, come on, how many of you actually think Sonic's Napoleon is a mainline Sonic game? I didn't want to waste time putting every single super obscure game on there because if we're being honest, they would have ended up at the bottom of the mainline list along with Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car and Wacky World's Creativity Studio. The goal of the survey was not to list every single Sonic game, it was to find out the list of top games that the majority of people thought were mainline, and I think I accomplished that goal. But to be fair, people bringing up every obscure Sonic game in the book is all my fault. Once I included SegaSonic Popcorn Shop in the survey, all bets were off. At that point, just about anything could be considered a Sonic game, and I couldn't really argue with you, so that's on me. I included SegaSonic Popcorn Shop as a joke to do a little trolling of my own, and it was the end of me. So I guess the last question to ask is, do I now know what a mainline Sonic game is? Well, honestly, I think a game being mainline or a side game or spin-off or anything at all really is all about how the game makes you feel. If you look at a game and you get that grandiose feeling that this game was a pivotal moment in the Sonic franchise, then it's probably a mainline game. If it doesn't quite feel that way, then it's probably a side game. And if it feels like something entirely different, then it's probably a spin-off. The only thing I'm not going to comment on is what makes a game a Sonic game versus not a Sonic game, because if I were to do that, then I'd be here all week. This video is getting absurdly long, so for my sanity, I think I should end things off here. I want to greatly thank all 2,025 people who finished the survey, and all of you who watched this video up till now as well. This has without a doubt been the biggest project I've done on this channel, and while there definitely were some things I'd change about the survey, having finished it and gotten all of your feedback, I'm proud of what we've accomplished here. If anyone wants to do a super comprehensive, exhaustive look at every single Sonic thing that could be remotely considered a video game, be my guest, but I am done, man. I've typed thousands upon thousands of words, I've looked over a ton of data, I had to record and edit this video, and I'm exhausted. So I don't ask this much, but if you did enjoy the video, then please leave a like. If you want to support me, then the best way to do that right now is just to watch another one of the videos that I've made. I've got a bunch of other Sonic videos as well as videos on other niche topics like video game updates for retro games, video game box art, and whatever random thing YouTube wants to recommend to you. That's all I've got to talk about for today though, so thanks for watching y'all, and have a great rest of your day.